Better go get some more quick. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself, but before we do that, I want to find out a little bit about you. So let's start right here with Sarah.
Right as I take a bite.
And after Sarah, let's start with Tiana then.
Hi.
Everybody's eating their stuff. We'll go back to Sarah. She looks like she's ready. Just tell me in 30 seconds what you're involved in, what your interest is in being an entrepreneur, and let's go around the group.
Okay. Sure. My name is Sarah, and I'm interested in doing international humanitarian stuff, especially for women. So I want to empower women and possibly find their own businesses for them in third party in third world countries, and just help them in any way possible.
Okay. Tiana.
My name is Tiana. I grew up in Italy and other places in the States, and I have multiple businesses. I aspire to create my own real estate empire, starting with my first property in Utah this year, and working on multi-unit family apartment buildings, and hope to get to a point where I can inspire and teach other people with what I've learned. So happy to be here.
Good, thank you, Tiana.
I'm Daniel Paylais. I've been a general contractor for officially a year now, but I've worked under my dad's license for the past 5 years. I'm just mainly involved in new construction and remodels and additions, but I'm building a couple of my own duplexes this year, so I'm going to be transitioning to real estate and more of my own projects and development there, so mainly development, I guess. So,
I'm Eric. Hey. In December, my night job went in Batman. I actually own real estate. I've got 15 doors right now, and I'm closing on 17 more in the next month. So, and I'm coaching people on how to do real estate. So that's my life.
Okay. We should have Eric teaching this lesson.
Well, I'm doing another
Sounds like
one.
you've got a lot more experience.
Alrighty, I'm Daniel. I'm a student over at BYU right now. I'm trying to graduate in exercise science, but I'm finding myself falling behind a lot of my peers in level of interest. They're a lot more into working on cadavers and with bodies, and I'm just kind of I enjoy it, but I'm just I don't know, trying to keep my options open.
Rachel.
I am Rachel. I just graduated from BYU. I'm currently teaching, and
What age group, Rachel?
high school statistics.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
And you're what?
And I work with a small local nonprofit, A Voice for Good, and so just working on that.
Andrew?
I'm Andrew Martin. I'm currently working at New Skin. I have been for 7 years, and I just bought
Since you were what, 15?
Yeah. Well,
Just kidding.
I started just before going out and serving my mission. Worked there for almost a year, and then came back in 2015. I've been there ever since.
Wow.
And so, I've been working at New Skin, saving up, bought my first property this year, and got a pretty decent deal on it. It's already grown a decent amount in equity, and so hopefully gonna make the next step here and maybe take out a HELOC if I can in the next couple months.
Move forward
for
on
another
something
property.
else.
Yeah.
And Mike?
I'm Michael Martin. I have always loved business and entrepreneurship so much that when I went to school, I talked to the mentors, and they basically said as long as you can be a self-learner, self-doer, that you can do it. But you can learn it here, you can learn it there, and I found that I was better learning on the job. So I worked with a couple different startups. Over the last year, I've been helping launch a company to actually compete with one of my old bosses, which has been really fun. But now I'm trying to finally get to what my real goal is, which is investing in real estate and building wealth that way. So anyway, happy to be here.
It's good to have you all here. So it sounds like about 75% of you are trying to focus on real estate. And real estate has been a major focus in my life, but there are other things that I've done also. This is my wife, Jody, back here. Jody is trying to support us by painting now. She's just taking her painting in the last few months. And she has a little business, so she's an entrepreneur. She has one on Etsy where she crochets newborn baby props. And I think she's done about 12,000 of those over the last few years.
Cool.
So until she tore the ligaments in her thumb here 2 months ago, now she's painting because she can't crochet. Until that time, she usually did about 5 or 6 of those a day and sent them all over the world. So she's had a little business, and it's given her an opportunity to do it. She has, at one time, had her real estate license. And Jody, what happened with that license? I can't remember exactly, but
I let it go because I became a mother.
that was part of the reason. She absolutely told me she hated it.
I didn't like it.
Be involved with real estate, and that's back a long time ago.
He left me at home to sell one house, and I got my back. I says, I don't ever want to do this again. I'll just be a wife and mother.
So let me tell you a little bit about my background, and maybe that'll spur some questions later on. I was raised on a ranch in eastern Utah, farm and ranch. There we raised cattle, had some sheep, but focused mostly on cattle and on crops. And so at a young age, I knew what it was to work 12, 16 hours a day. My first job was my kindergarten year. So I'd go to kindergarten in the morning. In the fall, I would go home and drive tractor to haul hay for my uncle, and he would pay me 25 cents an hour to do that. I was not strong enough to even push down on the clutch and brakes on the tractor, so he had to help me do that. Can you imagine that? Let's see, 6 months, right?
Yeah.
That'd be 4.5 years, 5 years from now, she'd be driving a tractor out in the fields. So I started at an early age doing that, and gained a great deal of confidence thinking I could do anything until I tried to fly an airplane the first time. And that was when I was a student here at BYU. We were married, and I crashed it out here at the Provo airport. We both walked away from it, thank goodness, along with the people that were with us. I was trying to land it, and I'd never landed an airplane before. In fact, I'd never flown one before. But my friend told me I could do it. And I had never seen a piece of equipment that I didn't think I could handle. And so I flew the airplane around for a little while, came in to land it. That was the old airport, so there was wind coming in off the lake there, and just kind of picked us up in the air, and I didn't know how to react. So I went in nose first. We went out through the brush and shoved the engine back into the cockpit, and my wife wouldn't let me fly after that. So, at least when she was with me.
Seems like a good decision.
It's like a lot of my decisions in life that I've made in regards to being an entrepreneur. And, so how did I become an entrepreneur? Let me tell you just a few things. My father was an entrepreneur. Owning a ranch and a farm, you have to be. And you have to be able to do an awful lot of things. Everything, basically. You're a mechanic, you're a money manager, you're a veterinarian, you're everything that you have to be. And so watching him, I kind of leaned that direction. But when I was 17, I took a junior in high school. I took an accounting class at the technical college there in Roosevelt, Utah, if any of you know where Roosevelt is. And they just built a new college there next to us from an extension of Utah State that year. And so I took an accounting class, and taking it and whatnot, I decided I would set some goals. So I set a goal. And my goal was, I said, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm age 30. I didn't set any goals as to how to become that, but that was the goal that I set. And I thought, education-wise, one of the ways I could get there, I want to be an accountant and then get a law degree. So that was my wish up until about age 21, freshman year of college, playing basketball. Got in the way of that, went to Dixie College, then to Utah State, then found out I wasn't going to be an NBA player, and decided, hey, I'm going to go on a mission. The Vietnam War was going full blast right at that time, so I had a choice, Vietnam War or mission. My draft number was 132, and they were getting close to it. That was the first year, and they were getting close to it, so I was going to volunteer at number 132, so I knew I'd do that. So I had an opportunity to go on a mission. They were letting, if those of you that are LDS, they were letting one person per ward per year go on a mission at that time.
Whoa.
So my best friend in the ward, there were only 2 of us in the ward, but he went on the mission the year before. I waited a year and then went. And went to Japan, That was a great experience. I'll tell you a little story about Mount Fuji in just a few moments. But great experience. Came back from Japan, went to BYU, and still was in the accounting program. Met my wife at BYU that very first year that I was back, and she convinced me that I would be better off with her, and to thank goodness, and she was right, as she is in most cases, and we decided to get married. So we got married after I'd been back about 8 months from my mission in the spring. Only led to one problem. I was working at BYU. I was a custodian. I was working at nights. I basically owned the Wilkinson Center, for those of you that have been there, and did the janitorial work there in the mornings from 2 to 7 every night. So that's what I was doing, dating my wife. We got married in May. Just before we got married, we were sitting in the library. And how are you doing? Come on in. Tell me your name.
I'm Sean.
Hey, Sean. So we were sitting in the library and discussing a few little things quietly in a whisper. And I wrote on a piece of paper, I said, you know that I would rather work 16 hours a day for myself than 8 hours a day for someone else, don't you? And she answered yes. And I found out something right then and had through the years that I can tell you right now. If you want to be an entrepreneur and your spouse or significant other doesn't buy into that, it's a long road to hoe. It really doesn't work very well because there are some real problems that come with trying to be an entrepreneur. Some of you are already going through those. That's called starting up and making it succeed. You've all been to the classes. What percentage of new businesses fail?
What time frame?
All over the first 5 years.
90.
90
Okay.
plus.
Yeah, that's a pretty common number that everybody comes up with. It's about 90%. So that means 9 out of 10 fail within the first 5 years. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and you'll find out some of them as you go through. But I'm going to try to explain some of the reasons that they work also, being an entrepreneur. So I've written up here on the board. Anyhow, we got married. We went back to being a farmer that year. I leased a farm next to my father's place, a ranch, and we farmed for a year. And then my wife became pregnant. I helped and had to take full responsibility for that. And we had some medical problems, couldn't come back to school because we didn't have any money. We were spending it on some other things. And so we stayed out of school for a few years, and I started managing a company at that time, a feed and seed company that catered to dairy farmers and to all the farmers in the area, fertilizer, everything else. And so we did that for a couple of years and saved up enough money to come back to school. I, at that point, did a 90 degree. I decided I wanted to be a doctor. We had 2 little children. Daniel understands what that's like a little bit with one. We had 2 when we came back to school, and we were living in an apartment that was costing us $250 a month. I was working at BYU in a lab and as a teaching assistant in the zoology department, and I was making $1.75 an hour. And so in conjunction, you can see, didn't last very long. We had saved up some money. We'd saved up about $10,000 to come back to school. That lasted us 2 full years, so 6 semesters. Went through medical school, interviewed only at the University of Utah, because at the University of Utah I could go into the Air Force or one of the Armed Services branches, and they'd help me pay for the school. There were no grants. There was nothing else at that time to go to medical school. So if you didn't have a father that was wealthy or family, you didn't go to medical school. And so went and interviewed. They told me they would accept me the following year. Came home, discussed it with my wife. We looked at 10 years there and 10 more years in service because you had to commit for 1 year for every year you were in school. So that was 20 years. I was 26 years old at the time. So that meant 46, I'd be able to start practicing, right, and, on my own. And and it had been a tough 2 years. While working here at BYU, I had those 2 jobs. I would go home at night. If I got home, it would be around 9 o'clock. I had a cot in the lab down at BYU, and I slept there some nights overnight because I'd get through working and studying and whatnot late. And by the time I went over to Orem to our apartment and back and got back, it would be just a few hours of sleep. So I'd stay there some nights. When I did go home, I would lock the bedroom door so my wife couldn't come in and bother me, so I could study, because I had to get straight A's to get into medical school, right? And so I didn't get to see the kids much or anything else. So we decided that was not the route to take. But we didn't have any other routes. There wasn't anything else that we could really do. We had moved to a little home south of campus, and we're living in it. I had an uncle who was working in real estate. Same uncle that had hired me to help him haul hay when I was in kindergarten, that moved here to Provo. And so he said, have you thought about real estate? And I thought, well, I've got an accounting background. I've got 2 years in college in accounting. I've got enough to get a minor in zoology, chemistry, Japanese, a couple of others, but no major. So I didn't graduate. I could have graduated in general studies, but it didn't really do me any good at that point. That's what I would have done if I would have gone to medical school, was just taken a general studies degree. So I didn't graduate, and I took the real estate class and started selling real estate. My wife was pleased about that. Jody, do you want to tell them how pleased you were about me selling real estate?
My father was a doctor. He told me to marry a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
And when he came home and said he was going to do real estate, I thought, I have married a failure.
Oh, shoot.
I really did.
She didn't say that to me, thank goodness. She's always been the most supportive person you could imagine. But I kind of knew how she felt. I knew how her family felt. My family had the feeling that whatever you're going to do it to the best of your ability, and we'll support you in it. And maybe because we came from a little bit more humble roots. And humble was not a good word, but anyhow, that's what it was. So real estate. So I decided I was going to sell real estate. The first home that I bought was the one we were renting. I came home from working one day after about a month at real estate, and there was a sign on the lawn that said it was for sale. So I called them up, made them an offer. We paid $26,000 for it. I didn't have any money. So I went to my uncle and I said, Uncle, will you help me finance this home? And we'll split the profits, and I'll pay rent while we're living in it. He said, okay. So we went to the bank, borrowed the money, $26,000, bought the home, and sold it 3 weeks later and made a profit. We sold it for $31,000. So we had $5,000 profit that we made in that period of time. And I'd gone in and painted it and done a few little things with it. So kind of Daniel, what you do, and Eric, I started that by cleaning a few things up and just cosmetic stuff, not a lot of money into it at all. And we resold it. We then didn't have any place to move, and so being in the real estate market, I quickly tried to find a place, and I found a home that has become my wife's favorite home. It was just south of campus. There were 2 Great Danes that lived in it. The people were chain smokers that had lived in it for a long time, and it had set on the market and nobody wanted it. They didn't think that, no one thought they could do anything with it. We paid $31,000 for it, moved in, repainted it, put some new carpet in it, and 4 months later sold it for $42,000. That was the one my wife tried to sell, because in the meantime I bought a ranch. The ranch that I bought was, I found it in the paper. I was familiar with it because it was in eastern Utah, familiar with the location and different things. Called up the guy, he says, yeah, I'll sell it to you, $5,000 down, and I'll carry $85,000 over a 10-year period. So I didn't have any money. I didn't have $5,000. So I went to my uncle again, and I says, hey, look, I just bought this place. I've already signed the contract, but I've got to come up with $5,000. Can you come up with $2,500 and I'll give you 50% of the ownership? He knew the place also because he had a ranch out there right close to it. He said, yeah, I'll do that. That only left me with $2,500 to come up with, which we didn't have. So I went to my father and I said, look, I'll give you 25% or half of my half if you put up the other $2,500. There was a little bit of scheming behind the scene because both of them had equipment. They had farms and ranches and they had equipment to run it. So we bought this ranch, nothing down, basically $5,000 and a contract, and went out, worked it for the spring and part of the summer, and then I knew some things that was happening on that place, so I sold some water rights off and did some different things with it, and we had sold it by the end of the summer. And so we had moved back out there from Provo. My wife was left. She sold our home here, or helped sell it, that we had down south of campus, and I think our share out of that was $40,000 is what we got out of it, which was a lot of money back then. That was 1978. So our third child was born during that time out there, and we moved back to Provo into this ward down, well, it's the red brick home on Oneida. And at that time, then we bought a lot of that's now one of Roni's parks across the street from their house. We were going to build up there, and then some things happened where my wife's father, who was in Brazil, had a heart attack. And with that heart attack, it was a major heart attack. Gary, who later became my partner in some of the real estate deals that you've all met, he was living with us in that house down there and going to school here at BYU at the time. He was just got back off of his mission. His father had the heart attack, called and said, "Hey, I'm going to die probably. Can you take care of our affairs?" Or his wife did. And I said, "I don't know anything of your affairs," but I jumped into it. They had some real estate holdings in California and some different things. And so we jumped in and tried to take care of all of those. And for the next few years, that was my major focus, was managing those assets and getting them taken care of so that if he did pass away, that he would be able to take care of it. Part of that was we bought this acreage right along here where our house sits. And we bought it from the church. They had just bought it to build this church down here. And they were going to build a double church. And then it didn't turn out where they wanted to do that, so this was excess property. And we bought it, and you all drove along the road out here tonight. That was in 1980. And when I developed this and built this home, I had to put that street in. So it was dirt at that time. So I'll give you a little bit idea how old I am. So I'm old. I've had a lot of experience, a lot of successes, a lot of failures. So much to tell people and teach them. So few that want to hear. Including my children. So that's kind of the background for us. The way I got into real estate then was by chance. And I wish I would have had the same opportunities that some of you have, deciding, oh, this is what I'm going to do. These are the steps that I'm going to take as you're trying to get into it. But you'll see that I was forced, in a way, to take some of those same steps. With us, there was no fallback position. There were no other choices than to make it succeed. And so that's why I've written this word on the board up here tonight, entrepreneur. All of you want to be entrepreneurs. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? How do you define it? I mean, you're trying to do it, right, or you're doing it. But what does it really mean to be an entrepreneur? Let's discuss that now. Let's discuss some of the pros and cons. Maybe I can help you avoid some things. And maybe you can teach me some things as to if I decide I want to get back into the game. Okay?
Join us.
So what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Michael?
My biggest thing is that I think you got to be a problem solver, and it's not just a problem solver in the way that you see it, but in the way that your customer, your market sees it. You got to help solve the problem in a way that they like, and so it's kind of being a little bit of a people pleaser because you got to do it the way they want it, but it's finding solutions and being able to look at things in creative and new ways and be able to kind of imagine things that haven't really come around. So being able to come up with a solution to a problem.
Okay, I think that's a little bit more specific answer in a specific area than maybe what I'm looking for, but Daniel.
To some degree, you have to be mindful in as much as you are your own boss. So it's not just mindlessly going to work and crunching numbers for someone else. You have to decide what you're going to do.
You're kind of accountable.
Yeah.
You mean if I come and work for you for a couple of years, you shouldn't probably give me half the business after you've got it going?
I mean, that'd be interesting.
Who would be the entrepreneur there, me or you? Yeah. Maybe I found out a way to be an entrepreneur. As I looked at the dictionary and whatnot, how to define entrepreneur, it says a person who organizes and operates a business or businesses, taking on greater than normal financial risks in order to do so. So it kind of ties those things together. And those of you that are trying to do this right now, you're starting to see, especially that second one, you're starting to take on financial risks. And so, and with those financial risks, you have to decide what the fallback is. You have to be a manager. You have to do all types of things with it. But it's an area only for the brave of heart. Let me tell you that. And most people don't understand it when they start into it. And they don't understand all those risks that are associated with it. I've spent more money on attorneys in my lifetime than what most people make in a lifetime. over $1.5 million on attorneys. You know, I should have gone to law school, right? No, because those attorneys were specialists in different areas. Lawsuits, as a general contractor, were part of those. Lawsuits, liability lawsuits, slip and falls, different things, people getting hurt on, either on a job or on an apartment complex or in a commercial building that I owned. All of those types of things. Others, people didn't pay their bills. I had to go after them. You know, there's all kinds of things that have to fall together in order to be an entrepreneur. You really do have to manage and be able to operate your business. And so with that, the first thing of advice that I would give you is get all the education you can. Now that doesn't necessarily mean college education. It can be, because there's some really good stuff that's taught down there. If you get too much education in college, I call them academicians. You know, they're now those who teach it but didn't live it. But there are some that lived it too. I have a neighbor that's an economics professor, and he didn't start out to be an entrepreneur. He wanted to teach economics. But through the years, he's found out that he could do two things really well. One is write books. He can sell his own books for his own classes, right? And to other colleges. We've all been through this. And he's also an expert witness when it comes to economies with major businesses. So he flies all over the country. He set up that business. It's become more lucrative, those two things, than his teaching. But his teaching was a fallback position. Same thing I learned when I was young. All the better or more successful farmers and ranchers around us, usually their spouse worked at another job, like being a nurse or a teacher or something else. They had steady income. And so you need to look at those types of things when you're going to be an entrepreneur, and you say, where's my income coming from? You know, if I'm buying a property, is that property going to support itself completely? Or am I going to have to put money into it, and where's that going to come from? If you're working for Adobe right now, it makes it a little bit easier. You know, you're going to find out as soon as you're self-employed, it's harder to get a loan.
Mm.
Yeah, much more difficult.
Yeah, if you're going through a normal bank, I agree.
Yeah, and unless you can find some way to access funds a different way, and so you've got all these pitfalls and challenges that are going to face you as you try to do the different things that you're going to do. Trying to get people to fund your project, to buy into your project. How are you going to be able to present it? I found it at an early age that you have to focus on the money. You have to follow the money. Where's it coming from? How am I going to get it? I found out that banks are a tool. All lending institutions are just a tool. They're nothing sacred. But you've got to figure out how to use the tool to be able to finance whatever you want to do. And so that's something that you'll want to write down. So you're going to be an entrepreneur. What are some of the talents or some of the traits that are necessary in an entrepreneur? As you think of yourself and you self-evaluate, that's one of the very first things that you've got to decide. Do I have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? Do I want to have what it takes? Because there are some pros and cons that come with it. And so we'll deal with those in just a moment with what the pros and cons are. But tell me, let's just go around the group and start over here with Andrew. Tell me one thing that you think is a trait of an entrepreneur that is successful.
You gotta be a self-starter.
You know, that was my first one. Did you read my list?
No.
He just came over and looked at it.
Okay. You have to be a self-starter.
Yeah.
That means you get yourself out of bed in the morning. Working for myself, really, I did work 16 hours a day instead of 8. I worked 6 days a week. And when we had the ranches and farms, I worked 7 days a week sometimes. They owned me. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, your business owns you. You don't own it. And maybe the banker.
You gotta be a self-starter.
You know, that was my first one. Did you read my list?
No.
He just came over and looked at it.
Okay. You have to be a self-starter.
Yeah.
That means you get yourself out of bed in the morning. Working for myself, really, we were doing about $50 million a year in commercial work. And so it was here in Salt Lake and some in California, some in Colorado. We were licensed in those states. We stayed away from the union states, except for one job we did in California, but mostly here. So you have to learn to work with people. Yes, Eric.
I was gonna say you got to be pretty quick to be aware of when you need to pivot. So self-awareness of when you need to change things up.
Okay, you got to be a decision maker, right?
Yeah.
And are you going to be right every time?
Never.
Okay, my goal was to be a millionaire by the time I was age 30. I changed that goal when I was 28. And the goal became, I want to be in debt $1 million by the time I'm 30. Because I didn't think I was going to be able to achieve the other one. So I pivoted, made a decision, and we moved forward just a little bit more. During that time, you need to ask my wife sometime if you get a chance, but I had a 10-year budget.
Wow.
10-year projected in the future. Because my parents taught me a few things when I was young. One of them was you pay 10% to the Lord first, then you pay yourself 10% for investing, and then you live off the rest. And so that was our goal, and we were always trying to put at least 10% away so that we had it to invest it when the time came. So every one of these little deals, we put it away until we're able to accumulate enough money that now we could make decisions based upon a larger project if we wanted to buy something that we really needed to buy instead of having to depend on everybody else to put it together. Those deals of giving half away at first for $2,500, those stopped.
Yeah.
Okay? But at first I had to do that to be able to survive. And so I had to give quite a bit. Okay, do you have any back there, Michael?
Biggest thing with being an entrepreneur that I know is you need to have a good network. You need to have people who you can reach out to because you need to be able to leverage other people's time and skills and knowledge. And I think having a network where you've got some mentors or some friends or people it's how you get started at least. And then the bigger network grows, the more opportunities you're going to find probably.
Okay, and that's even more important now than it used to be. I was a lone wolf. You know, fighting the battles myself and everything else. And I wanted it that way. I didn't want partners. Then I realized I've got to have some partners to do certain things. One of my partners was Gary Brinton, and it was necessary to get him involved in a project that I was doing because the family owned the property. So he moved from California to become involved in that project and has been here ever since and become very successful in the things he did. And we stayed together for 7 years as partners. Then in 2000 we split. He went his way and I went my way. And we do a few things right now together, but mostly I do a little consulting with him and that's about it. Apartment complexes. Yes, Daniel.
I think a big thing for me that's helped me the most in my company is confidence and humility are the things that drive my company. You know, somebody will ask me, "Hey, can you do this? Can you build this certain thing?" And I'll say, "Yep, I can definitely get it done." Even if I can't, and then I'll call my dad and be enough to have him help me out and teach me a little bit, or somebody else that has experience in that field that will help me out. So I think that confidence and humility will take you places.
Yeah.
So.
Somebody has made every mistake. And one of the keys is to find out those people that have made the mistakes and learn from them so that you don't have to make the same mistake again. If you make it again, it can destroy your business. And everything that you've tried to accomplish over a few years, it can set you right back to the very beginning. So the reason that 90% of them fail, they make a few mistakes and they don't have the ability, they don't have the financial backing to carry it through the small mistakes that they make and the problems that occur. Okay, Tiana.
I think it's important, it's essential to be resilient, tenacious, and driven, just being prepared to confront the inevitable roadblocks, anything that would come up, and being quick to find a solution. And it's kind of drawing into everyone else's.
Okay, I wrote. Excuse me.
Oh, no, I'm finished.
I wrote on this little list that I had be able to make a commitment, and then stick to that commitment until you see that you got to change, and you got to be wise enough to be able to see when you're going to change. That you've got to make the change if you have to make it. I changed a few times in my lifetime from doing different things. The other thing that I would say is find out what you really like and what you're good at, and set your goals, and then stick to that. I've lost money in a lot of things that were not in my area of expertise. The stock market. That was a tough one. Even though I have a little bit in the stock market now and a little bit in cryptocurrency. It's just like playing 21.
Roll them dice.
Yeah, there's a chance you're probably going to lose most of that. So that's the high risk stuff that never more than 10% invested in any of that kind of stuff for me. Then there are some things in the stock market that I would invest in that are what I call the medium risk things that I would be fairly comfortable in about as much as real estate. Most people are gambling; they're looking for that high risk, high return, right? The cryptocurrency. Okay, Sarah, anything?
I think it's important to have a why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Because that ultimately is going to drive whether you're motivated to do it and you're committed to do it and you have the tenacity to continue to do it. But then also balancing that with asking lots of questions, listening, observing, and being sure that you have a good lay of the land, and balancing that with why you're doing what you're doing so you have the ability to do it.
Okay, I wrote on my list, I said, understand your motivations. What's motivating you, and is it motivating you enough that when the tough times come, you're going to fight through? Somebody told me once, it's kind of like you go under the water and you're almost drowning. And if you want to make something succeed, you've got to want to make it succeed just as much as you want air when you're drowning and under the water. And if you don't have that commitment and that motivation, you're probably not going to succeed. And I'm going to read you a poem about that in just a second. And I didn't know your name.
Phil.
Phil, please.
Yeah, I think an important thing to have is the ability to learn and to learn quickly. And then kind of ties into like having resilience and stuff like that. Because a lot of entrepreneurs that I've shadowed and stuff, they say almost daily you have moments where you're stumped, where you hit a point where it's like, I don't know how to do that. And then the resilience comes in where it's like, okay, time to learn and time to act quick and figure out how to do this. And that not quit, not like having that motivation to like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. There's no turning back, and I'll either fail or succeed.
That's right. Thanks, Phil. So let me read you just a couple of things that I have written down here, and you've covered most of them. You have to be a self-starter, self-discipline. If you don't have self-discipline, you have no right being an entrepreneur. I mean, if somebody has to tell you you have to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're going to be off at 5, you better stick with that job and then do entrepreneurship on the side, okay? Able to make commitments, be well educated, read, study, keep up with what's going on in your industry of choice. Because there are lots of different things to be an entrepreneur in, right? It's like Mount Fuji. I used to teach the gospel to people in Japan, and they, as a missionary, they'd look at me and they'd say, why yours? There's lots of paths to the top of Mount Fuji. We can take any of them. It's an old Japanese kotowaza. We can take any path and get to the top of Mount Fuji. And I used to look, and that's like being an entrepreneur. There are lots of paths, but there are a lot of pitfalls. So you've got to choose the right paths and not pick the wrong ones very often, because some of those paths don't work out. You have to be smart. You have to be a person that doesn't need to have a lot of confirmation or adoration from others. I mean, you got to find it in yourself. The confidence that Daniel was talking about just a few moments ago. You got to have the confidence in your idea and in what motivates you, and say, okay, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to go forward. From time to time, there will be others that will still stop you, but you better give it all you can. You got to be willing to take risks. You got to be a hard worker. You got to be able to deal with setbacks and failures. And decision maker, as Eric said, you have to be a manager. Be able to interact with yourself and others. Manage yourself and manage others. That's why so many businesses fail. You're wearing 20 hats all the time as an entrepreneur. I mean, that's why so many doctors are successful. Do you know how many things they're focused on? One thing, and then they become successful in real estate and whatnot, right? Because they focused on that one thing. Maybe that'll be your route too. Maybe you should focus on one thing and get there to a certain point where you now can change your focus to something else. And that's a decision each of you have to make as you go along. I made that decision because I was forced to. There was no turning back. There were no other choices at that point. And so, sink or swim. Yes, Eric?
I was just going to say, I think a lot, just because of the way things are changing, a lot of us in our age group are going to be exactly like you. We're going to be forced out of 9-to-5 careers or even positions we're creating for with our own companies just because of where automation's going and the way like companies are figuring out more and more how to have less employees. Like a lot of us are going to be in that situation. So it's good that we're looking forward to trying to learn those skills.
Okay, and that ties right into the next thing I was going to talk to you about, which is pros and cons of being an entrepreneur. One of the pros is you're your own boss. The trouble is most people aren't a very good boss. You know that? They're really not. I mean, they need somebody else telling them what to do and driving them and everything else. You've seen that in your industries that you're involved in. Another pro is that there's no glass ceiling. As far as if you're working for a wage, a salary, unless you're in something that there's some commissions involved or something else, profit sharing, you've got a glass ceiling. You're not going to rise above that. So that extra 10% that you got to save for yourself, that I was talking about, that was in my budget, usually there's no 10%. You're spending it on the necessities of life just to survive. And so that's one reason a lot of people become entrepreneurs, to get through that glass ceiling at the top. It's something you can build for the future. You can, real estate for instance, you can invest in it and whatnot, it pays back after 30 years or 20 years, or whatever your mortgage is. You have to stay in it though long enough for it to pay you back. No one can fire you. It's something you maybe can build up to leave a family or loved one in the future, so they don't have to start over again like you did and fight through all those battles. It's not always good, but sometimes it is good to give them a little bit of help. I know one of the reasons we were successful is because as I started managing my wife's family's affairs, I made some pretty good decisions, and we ended up with some properties that accelerated in value, and because of that, it put me in a better financial situation. So I was using someone else's money and abilities to be an entrepreneur because the future was, it would reciprocate to me and I would profit from that future if I made the right decisions. So there are ways that sometimes that happens once in a while, and that helped us. The cons, here's some of the cons. No guaranteed income. I was talking to a young man that just started his own title company the other day after working for 20 years at a title company. And I said, what's tough about this? And he says, I never realized the hours. He says, I'm working every day, late and on Saturdays. He says, quality time with my family that I thought I was going to have because I own my own business is not there. And I said, give it a few years. Give it a few years. Because with your own business, you can leverage time. You can leverage ability. You can leverage money. That's why real estate is beautiful, because it covers all of those things. There are some others that the industry, developing a company or a software or something like that helps too. But the cons are longer work hours. 90% fail. There's no quality time left to spend with your family because it owns you for a while. And so you have to have a significant other, spouse, that understands. My wife was, thank goodness her dad was an entrepreneur, he was a doctor. He was gone most of the time. And she was able to accept that and willing to, and it worked out very, very well for us. But it was still a challenge that you would look at us and you'd say, oh, they're a 50s or 60s family. That's right. She's handled so many things so that I didn't have to. Mm-hmm. So I could focus on the business. So we're truly a true partnership in that expense. No one out there, if you're an entrepreneur, worries about you surviving. That's one of the hard things to understand is nobody cares, really. In fact, most of the people out there, what they care about is how they get the dollar out of your pocket and put it in theirs. That's what they're thinking about, and that's what you're thinking about as an entrepreneur. How do I get money from everybody else to me? And I got to find some product, some business, something that's going to want them to give me their money. And so that's being a true entrepreneur. In fact, not only do people not worry about you surviving, most of them dislike what you're trying to do. Selling real estate, which is what I started out in, was a tough one. Now it would be easy. I have all these contacts now. I mean, I could make a living just off of the people I associate with, just selling their properties, a few of them, 10 of them that I know, and dealing with them. Back then it was scratch. Every day I was handing out 10 cards. I was going to different places, meeting people, making presentations. Most of them didn't even want to hear it. Some of you have been missionaries, you know exactly how that feels. So I was doing the same thing. Okay, we're probably running out of time here a little bit, but I want to read you just a couple of little things that I grew up on. One was in my room, and I credit my parents an awful lot for me being wanting to be an entrepreneur and daring to be one. I'll grab that. Pass those around right there if you would. This is my PowerPoint presentation, by the way.
That's great.
Show the tree, right?
Hey, it'll grow back.
Just pass those around.
She was dead whether or not you printed her out.
So these are a couple of the principles we've talked about.
Did we just double it?
Pay yourself first after you've paid the Lord, if that's one of your beliefs. This is what my parents actually taught me. Spendthrift. Any fool can spend all he makes. That's something to remember. Interest. Those that understand it, interest, collect it. Those that don't understand interest, pay it. Albert Einstein. But my father told me that when I was still in my teens. Earning power. You can earn more money from the money that you invest wisely. You can earn working all the days in hours in a day. Learn to leverage your time, equipment, technology, effort, smarts, and money and people. Commitment, whatever you decide to do, and be the very best at it that you possibly can. Motivation. What is your motivation in doing what you do? I bought a cow once. Her name was Sabrina. She was the Grand National cow in 1982 in the United States. We paid $159,000 for her. There were 6 of us that bought her. And we put her on a dairy out in Goshen. Goshen's out by Alberta, if any of you have been out that way. And with their cattle, and what we did with this cow is we did what's called super ovulation. So we'd give her drugs so that she would ovulate more eggs than one at a time, 7 or 8, and we would fertilize those with the best bulls in the world. And then we would take her female calves and we would sell them over to Saudi Arabia and into those countries. We were getting $7,000, $8,000 a calf at that time. The bull calves were worthless, so raised for meat, but the female calves were. Mother was a Grand National champion. She died. She got sick after we got about 3 batches of calves out of her, and we had insurance on her, thank goodness. But she did die, and so I've had this sign hanging in my office, this picture for years. And it says, she's a beautiful cow, by the way. Mm-hmm. It says, my cow died, so I don't need your bull. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to understand what you're doing. This was not in my expertise, even though I'd helped with dairies and everything in my lifetime. And it was just kind of for fun, and just like most things for fun, we lost money on it. So be really careful in your decisions that you make when you're first starting out. You have to have a work ethic that's unbelievable. If you don't, you're going to find out that you don't succeed either. Entrepreneurs have to work a lot harder than other people do to survive. You have to have goals. Set some smart goals and work with them. It sounds like some of you have really set some good ones because you're working on not your first thing, but your second thing. I stuck a little sheet in here at the end that is a goal sheet that I put together years and years ago. And maybe some of you saw it as a missionary. We at the MTC, we this kind of caught on, and some people were using it and teaching others. But set SMART goals: simple, specific, measurable, things you can evaluate; achievable, those you agree upon with others; reasonable and realistic, time specific. And set them in different areas of your life so that you can balance your life. Otherwise, your life is going to really get out of balance as you start putting more and more time. Because, like I said before, it's going to own you. You're not going to own it. The business is whatever you're trying to do. This was a sign that was on my wall as a teenager. It hung in my bedroom. My mother put it there. It said, "One ship sails east" by L.O. Peter Wilcox. Read this little poem for a second and think about it. One ship sails east and another west by the self-same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales that tells the way they go. Like the winds of sea or the waves of time as we journey along through life, 'tis the set of the soul that determines the goal and not the calm or the strife. So pretty much everybody has the same situations, right? Surrounding us. It's you. If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, it's you. In the end, it makes it work. And you can learn from others and everything else. There's the Stockdale Paradox. I tell you all to read a book. It's called The Good something, but it has the Stockdale Paradox in it. Read that. That's how, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, there are three things right there that he learned as a prisoner of war in Vietnam that you had to do with situations that were bad. How do you deal with situations that are bad as an entrepreneur? One, he said, you retain absolute faith that you can and will prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties. And two, at the same time, you confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. That's one of the things that I saw a lot of people fail as entrepreneurs. They won't confront the brutal facts. And they keep ignoring it. Oh, no, this is going to work out fine. No, it's going to work out fine if you make it work out fine. If you don't, it's not. Then you make that experience a defining event or moment in your life. Something that you can look back on, and whether you fail or you succeed, you've learned something from it and you build on it. You make it a positive event, no matter whether it was negative or positive. Okay? You've got to know your own risk threshold. What's going to keep you awake at night, all night long, when you start getting involved in your business? And also, there's a sign in my office that says quality. If you want to deal in quality things, it's like buying oats. If you want good, clean oats, you must pay a fair price. However, if you're satisfied with oats, they've already been to the horse. They're a lot cheaper. That's how life is too. Happiness does not come from doing the things that we want to do. It comes from doing the things that are right and then being happy that you did them. You've heard that before. Somebody gave me a Christmas gift once. It was a plaque. And because I'm kind of a person that on the surface I look very calm. Underneath I'm just like a duck that's frantically kicking my legs trying to keep afloat. But I don't let very many people see that. So they gave me this plaque, and I thought, you really don't know me. It says, I've never expected much out of life, and so far I've never been too disappointed. Entrepreneurs expect a lot out of life. They expect a lot. And they expect that their hard work's going to get it. And they're going to reap the rewards of that. You have to pay the price, but sometimes, I'll tell you, that price, you've got to evaluate and see if it's really one that you want to pay. And if there's another way to get around it, if it's affecting other things in your life that are more important. And there are more important things than being a successful entrepreneur. There really are. This is from the prophet Joseph Smith. He wrote about faith. He said, we receive by faith all temporal blessings that we do receive, and we in like manner receive by faith all spiritual blessings that we do receive. The way I read that is, faith to me is 99% work and 1% believing that the Lord's going to help me. Okay, because if He intervenes in my life too much and causes all these miracles that I want Him to cause, that's really dealing with what I believe is called the law of agency. And so I think that the Lord generally tries to not get too involved in our lives other than giving us the right plans and the opportunities. And then it's what we make of them. So those are things you're going to have to figure out yourself, according to religious beliefs, if you have them. Life is like an old-time rail journey here from James Lloyd Jones, quoted by Gordon B. Hinckley. You've probably all heard this. Most cuts don't fall. Most beef is tough. Most marriages are successful, only a great deal of work. He goes through all the things. He says, but life is something, with all of this, remember that you've got to enjoy it. Just for a little humor, and then we're through. And I'll tell you a couple of things about myself again. These are performance evaluations you don't want if you want to be an entrepreneur. So let's read these really fast, starting with Andrew, and there are 25 of them. Read it, Andrew. These are things, people look at you, they can't think that you fit in this category if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur.
Number 1, since my last report, this worker has reached rock bottom and has started to dig deeper.
This worker is really not much of a has-been, but more of a definite won't be.
Works well when under constant supervision and concerned like a
And
rat.
cornered.
Cornered like a rat in a trap.
Is out of his or her depth in parking lot puddle. In a parking lot puddle.
This person has delusions of adequacy.
She sets low personal standards and then consistently fails to achieve them.
This person is depriving a village somewhere of a village inn.
This person should go find the sooner she starts the butter.
She appears to have a full six-pack, but when placed in pressure situations, you realize that she lacks the plastic thing that holds it all together.
Okay, now gross ignoramus, which is 144 times worse than ordinary ignoramus. These are actually things that were in people's folders, work evaluation. They're actual ones.
Man, people are mean.
That were put together. Well,
You're clever.
Clever. Very clever.
Okay.
He or she doesn't have ulcers, but he or she causes them, and in certain, he or she is a carrier.
Been working around glue too much.
Oh my god.
Would argue with a signpost.
That's me. Brings a lot of joy whenever he or she leaves the room.
If you see two people talking and one looks bored, he or she the other one. He or she's the other one.
A photographic memory, but with the lens cover glued on.
Donated their brain to science before they were using it.
Gates are down, the lights are flashing, but the train isn't coming.
If she were any more clueless, he'd have to be watered twice a week.
If you gave him or her a penny for their thoughts, you'd get change.
Some drink from the fountain of knowledge. This person only gargled.
Takes him or her 2 hours to watch 60 minutes.
I've done that.
The wheel is turning, but the hamster is dead.
We keep knocking, but no one answers the door.
The lights appear to be on and the music is playing, but no one seems to be at home.
So just a little humor there as you're looking at that. Evaluate yourself. If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, evaluate yourself. The businesses that I've run, if you ever want to talk about any of these, sometimes we got a little bit off track, my wife and I did. We started out of necessity being farmers. We ran that for a year. I went to a business then when I was a manager and managing people in a company. For a couple of years, saved up money and came back to college to change courses. It's okay to change courses if you find something's not working, but explore your different options. After college, went into real estate. Bought those homes that I told you about. Then started in 1987. I bought a couple of ranches, a big one down by Fillmore, Cove Fort. In fact, everything on the road from Cove Fort to Beaver on the right side of the road, if you ever ride past there. My wife owned that at one time, 157,000 acres of ranch ground. We bought it at an auction one night. We were sitting there. They foreclosed on it, came up for sale. I'd gone to buy another farm, which I bought out in eastern Utah that I knew about. This one I didn't know anything about other than it had 500 animal units on it. And I knew that an animal unit was worth about $1,000 per unit. That means one mother cow property. That's an animal unit. And so it went up for bid and I started bidding and my wife said, "What in the heck are you doing?" She was sitting next to me. She said, "Don't bid on that. You don't even know what that is." And I kept raising my hand. And she didn't. She walked out happy with me that night. I bought it, and we sold it a couple of years later for a fairly good markup. I wish I still had it. That would be one that we wish we still had.
I've driven past that so many times. I'm like, man, I wonder who owns all this land.
Yeah.
Totally.
eBay once.
It always goes for 150,000 acres every time.
Yeah. So now it'd be worth a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
Then we made some good money on it and moved on to something else. So that's the other thing that I would tell you as an entrepreneur. There are opportunities sometimes to take a profit and move on to something better. Sometimes you should be in a holding pattern and you need to look at those options and decide what you're going to do if it's real estate. In 1993, I was developing property and then I became a general contractor. And so we built some apartments down here called Belmont. I don't know if you know
Belmont.
where those are. So
Seven
we
Peaks.
built that. At the same time, Gary bought Seven Peaks, the water park there, next door to it. And then we built some things in Springville and a few different things with Gary. Then we split. I built the Walmart in Springville and all the property around that, and 500 homes back in there behind that. And then across the freeway, we built another 300 there in a place called Brookline, and did a lot of those. So for many years, we were selling about 10 a month. And then 2009 hit. 2008, 2009, you folks are probably too young to remember that. That real estate values dropped to 30% of what they had been the year before. We went from selling 10 homes a month to zero. Banks were not loaning money. You could not get financing. That's when, have you seen that big project down south of campus called The Crossing?
Yeah.
Okay, I developed that, put it together, had it all approved and everything. Through the city, it was approved to build. And we had the financing lined up through a couple of different banks, Wells Fargo and Zions. It was a $40 million build job. And things hit. And Zions called me and said, "We can only go to 10 million. We'll loan you 10 million. I says, "Oh, that's the parking garage. Thanks." So we were searching for other places. There was no one loaning money. So another group ended up with that. We turned that over to another group that had the finances to build it out of pocket at that time. And so they ended up with the plans and everything for it. My kids still feel bad that some of them won't drive past it. And, but so that was one of my projects. So I had a trucking company for a few years, semi-trucks. The hook there was that the government gave us 10% investment credit, so I was getting doctors and others like that to invest in them, and then we would manage them. They were long haul from here to Florida and different things. Had a women's clothing store for a while. Owned an automobile dealership for several years, and mechanic shop. So we've owned a lot of different things. Commercial real estate. At one time, I counted them up, we had 38 different LLCs, limited liability companies that we owned different properties in and managed that were our families. And it was harder getting it. With real estate, what you're going to find the hardest thing is, if that's going to be your baby, is once you acquire it, and you always try to buy right because you make your money on the buy. Very seldom do you make it as much on the sell as you do on the buy, if you can buy it right. But the biggest problem is management. Do I self-manage it? How do I get enough properties to where I'm the one managing it? And this is going to be true in any business that you're running, is at what point can I leverage it to somebody else to where they're doing it and I don't have to spend that extra time doing it. So that management part is really critical once you get things up. Because once you've been successful in setting something up, you can't take the chance of losing it again. Questions? Yes.
Have
Tim.
you found, it sounds like you've diversified your portfolio. Where have you found the most success, or which venue have you seen most of your energy and time go to? Would it be like, obviously you bought agricultural land, you've had multiple different types of properties, so I just didn't know what you would recommend in terms of.
The agricultural lands was the purchases were a means to an end. I was buying them to sell them, to turn them over, to do something with them that hadn't been done, pull water rights off, do something that now I can piecemeal them and sell them apart and make enough money to move to the next venture. And so when I sold those farms, then I took, and ranches, I took the money and I built the Belmonts. Okay? Had to have a certain amount of money to be able to go to the banks, to be able to borrow the money to build that project. Belmont, Arlington, Highland Park, those types down there. And then after that, real estate has been the key one for me. The development, I made more money in the development, buying a piece of property, changing the use, and then either doing construction on it, so doing the vertical, and then selling it, or selling it with the change of use than I did in being a general contractor or whatnot. Being a general contractor only paid the people that worked for me. That's where that money came in, and that's where it went. But any excess money that I made came in the development and working behind the scenes. Did I answer your question?
Yes, but I think specifically I was wondering, there's multiple types of real estate you can have. Like you mentioned, places like student housing, commercial, and so I just didn't know in terms of large real estate if there is one that is safer or more stable, I guess.
Yes, residential is always your more stable and your easiest one to get into.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to finance, it's easier to deal with, it's actually easier to manage. Because if you have 15 homes and you have one tenant not paying their rent, you're okay. If you've got an apartment or a commercial building and you've got 25,000 feet to one tenant and they go broke, and during 2008 and 2009, every tenant was going broke.
Mm-hmm.
And just like now, what you're seeing in the restaurant businesses and whatnot, if you own real estate right now and you're renting to a restaurant, you're in trouble. You know, especially outside the state of Utah.
Yeah.
So they just can't, they're not making very much money. So residential is the easiest to get into. It's the easiest to do financing for. It's the safest. You've got to have generally a 20 to 30 year plan with it. You'll have to refinance most of it after 10 years. And if it's an apartment complex or something like that, but for a fourplex, you can get a 30-year loan. And then you just try to make sure that it covers itself and gives you a little bit extra, enough to cover your expenses. You're going to find out that it's about 38%, somewhere in that range in a fourplex. That's going to be your expenses, your bottom line. And then, so you've got about 62% to cover your mortgages and to carry yourself on it. That's been where it's at. You know, every day it changes just a little bit. Right now, the interest rates are so favorable that there's a little bit more money in it, and the rents have been moving up so quickly. So,
What was maybe one of the bigger projects that you took on that kind of just stressed you out and was kind of just was something you wish you'd never done, maybe?
the trucking business, you know, was not really very big, but it took a lot of time and a lot of effort. I'd have a driver call me up and say, hey, I can't make my run from here to Seattle the next morning. You know, I left the truck here, and you can pick it up at this place. And so there were a few of those where I'd go and pick them up and have to drive them into Seattle or do something like that. So I got out of my expertise. I shouldn't have been in that business, and it stressed me out and took time away from my other businesses. Yes.
Two-part question. The second one, depending on your first answer. How much have you used your own resources to get your businesses going versus utilizing other people's money, not including loans?
Okay, the first few times I used other people's money because I didn't have it.
Yeah.
As soon as I got enough to where I didn't have to use them, I utilized my own, but I leveraged as much as possible. Always, my goal always on bare land was I wanted any money that I was borrowing from lenders or banks to be at less than 50% of appraisal value, market value.
Mm-hmm.
On properties, I didn't mind leveraging up to 80% on an apartment complex, and as long as it carried itself, as long as the numbers worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a numbers guy. That's one of my backgrounds is accounting, and so my wife can tell you I crunch the numbers.
Works great. So with that, can you explain us a little bit more what was your journey with your money? Like as you collected money from other projects, when would you decide, I can do a bigger project versus like, I'll do a lot of small projects all together at once? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Big projects would be like the Walmart in Springville.
Mm-hmm.
The land there, I had 80 acres of residential land and then 30 acres of commercial land that I bought. And I bought it at the time I bought it, the residential land cost me about $60,000 an acre, and the commercial was $100,000. And so I couldn't do that without the lenders.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first biggest project that I did on my own that I had to have the finance money coming into it. And I had to have about 25%.
Mm.
So you have to have about 25% on those types of projects to get there. And then you have to have good relationships with your lenders and whatnot, a proven track record.
Yeah.
So I worked with the lenders long enough that I got to a point where I could build 50 spec homes at any time. Any one time I could have 50 spec homes built. And we were generating about 10 a month, so you could go through those and you could see, so we were about a 5-month inventory, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good until the market turns completely like it did. And then I had a few spec homes that I had financed.
Sorry, I have one more question with that. So to get that 25%, would you just sell a ton of assets to get that money, or were you leveraging like crazy to get that money?
To get that first amount that I needed to do the Belmont projects, I sold every asset that I had other than that project. So I sold the ranch down here, I sold the ranch out there, I took everything else that we had and put it together, and I figured that I had to have $500,000 at that point that I could put into that project. And because that was a big one, that one was 370 units down there. The Belmonts and Arlingtons and whatnot.
Sounds like chess.
So it was just like chess, but you had to have enough to be able to build the project out, and you had to have enough to make it through several months. And I always figured I had to have a cushion of 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I was selling real estate, when I first started, I figured I had to have almost a year's cushion, because you don't know when the next sale is going to hit. And that's why I got away from that as soon as I possibly could and tried to take matters into my own hands and start buying and selling my own stuff rather than relying on somebody else to come and buy something from me. And you'll understand this one well. I bought the house for $26,000, sold it for $30,000. There were a lot of those homes south of campus that a few years later, now they're selling for $250,000, right?
Way more.
Yeah,
They're selling for $470,000.
Yeah, something.
The
like
crappy ones.
Something like that. but we were, you just couldn't come up with the money to buy them.
Yeah.
And it depends on when you start. Right now is a very good time for real estate in one way. The interest rates are really low. It's a really bad time because the prices are really high. And so you look at it on the top side and you say, what's the margin here? And so here was my philosophy. I always wanted at least 2 solutions to every problem, 2 escape routes in real estate. I could liquidate this way and survive, or I could go through to the end result and survive and make money that way. So if I have to take a hit, how am I going to get out? So that was my rule. Always have two ways to be able to survive through this project that you're going to get into. Mm-hmm. And if I couldn't figure that out, then I stayed out of it.
Seems like you want that with regular just businesses too. Like even
I would think that's
like
a good rule.
You need to have like several strategies. Like if I don't make money doing this, what can I still do with my product or service somewhere else?
I think that's a good rule.
Yeah.
Some you're limited in. The reason I chose real estate is because there's nothing that uses leverage like real estate does.
Yeah.
There's nothing out there, and so you can leverage $5,000 into $100,000 farm once in a while if you find the right deal. If you work hard enough to find the right deal. So leverage was it, Michael.
I just want to know where, like, how did you find your best deals and things? Like, I know, I mean, nowadays we have like a couple websites that everybody goes to, but I feel like, I don't know, it's through relationships. I would think you'd find your best deals, but I don't know.
When I was first starting out in real estate, I drove once a week. I drove every street in Provo and Orem,
Wow.
looking for things. A lot of them were cold door knocks. Hey, are you interested in selling this property? Others were I was also a real estate agent, so I looked at everything that was available on the market, and I tracked it. And if it's been on the market for 8 months, no one hasn't sold, or 6 months, what's the matter with this? These folks may take an offer on something that's unreasonable. So
Great.
this Daniel.
Would you recommend, if you have the means, to only go through private investors or to use the banks more?
I would probably use both. If you've got private investors, usually there's a limited amount of funds that are available with those private investors. And so you want to keep that available to you. Of course, if you don't use it, maybe somebody else is going to use it. You're not going to have access to it. You'll have to make that decision. But then where everything's so favorable with the banks right now, I'd use those as much as I possibly can. Like on real estate, I think right now you can buy, 4 or 5 properties, and that are
Through the bank.
rental properties with a lending institution. And so I'd maximize both sides of that. If you've got private money, that's a good fallback if you can get to that and somebody's working with you on that. But usually private money, like I do hard money loans on real estate, and you don't want to borrow money from me.
Quick rehab. Really quick.
I only loan on property that I want to own, and they know that going in. And usually, if they're coming to me, it means that they couldn't get it from a bank. So, yes.
2 questions. How do you develop more self-discipline in general? And the second one, what habits do you have for continuous learning? Whether that's learning about what businesses you want to go into, or books, or mentors, or how